Hi kids, so I have some amazing news for you. The first is that I found 2 of my necklaces that I thought I was missing, and the second is that I found my microphone, so now my sugar daddy won't have to buy me a freaking new one. Just kidding, I don't actually have a sugar daddy. Coercion, because if I am choosing to consent, to get like a cold slap of reality. Hot water. So I am literally sweating buckets. The whole club was looking and was looking at her. So this past Sunday, Jubilee dropped its longest middle ground video yet, which was trans conservatives versus trans liberals. This is the debate of the century, or at least that's how everyone on YouTube is treating it. Anyways, so I follow Blaire White on Instagram, but when Blaire White makes a really big mistake, I don't want my name to be associated with it. And she was talking about how she was invited to a Jubilee debate for trans liberals versus trans conservatives, and for the past couple of weeks, she was going on and on about how she was convinced that Jubilee was making her look bad, not giving her chances to speak. Everybody was extremely aggressive and ganging up on her on the liberal side. By the way, disclaimer for my audience, both old and new, I use preferred pronouns for trans people when talking about them directly or giving them the direct opportunity to respond. And for anyone saying, oh, she, her are not Blaire White's preferred pronouns, Blaire White doesn't have preferred pronouns. Blaire White is male. And if she didn't prefer being called she, her, I would call her he, him, just as I call every male. Alright, are we clear? Good, cool.
Anyways,
my initial reaction starting the video was expecting that Blaire was going to be shown in a super negative light. Every time a YouTuber or influencer appears on some kind of debate podcast or whatever, and then immediately takes to Twitter or Instagram to complain about how poorly he was treated, I do get a little bit suspicious. There's no way to make it work. Either you are trying to stand up for yourself because you know you're about to be represented very unfairly, or you're just trying to cover up for the fact that you did do a bad job. It does look as if there were certain cuts made that removed things that Blaire said, and it does seem pretty evident that the questions being presented for the trans people to answer were out of order. That seems to add up. It seemed that Jubilee made an effort to try to make the liberals look better than they actually did. This isn't really a video reaction and more just me responding to some things I noticed in the video. I'm just gonna kind of give my thoughts.
I just really hope that the people at the top that you're referring to aren't transphobic, because let's be clear of the isms that are in the military.
Man, we live in America, people are allowed to be.
Excuse me, I'm speaking. Do not interrupt a black trans woman when she's speaking.
I do think it was a bit of a mistake to have Blossom there, or at least both Blossom and Blaire, but just Blossom in general. And it's not because Blossom is so terrible. She's a one-on-one debater. She doesn't work in a large group of people. When Blaire and Blossom were talking, they were both going back and forth rapid fire, not giving other people to get a word in edgewise.
Not giving other people to get a word in edgewise.
Blaire can actually work in a large group of people. So eventually the moderators made this rule that both Blossom and Blaire had to be the last ones to speak, but ultimately only one person can be last. And that was always Blaire. They definitely tried to make Blossom look less insufferable than she did. It did seem that she made some aggressive threats.
Can you please stop? Okay. We're good.
You need to calm down.
No, you do, honey.
Oh my God, someone get a Xanax for her.
Oh, keep it cute, girl. Keep it real cute.
Oh, that's inappropriate, but the rest of shit isn't.
So yeah, I do see a lot of people just kind of ripping into the way Blossom looks simply because she has an insufferable personality. I am really uncomfortable making fun of the way people look. Can we please separate the appearance from the personality? Some key things I noticed, especially about all the trans guys. On the conservative side, there were 3 trans women and 1 trans guy. On the liberal side, there were 2 trans guys, 1 trans woman, and 1 non-binary male. It seemed that all the trans guys had dealt with intense trauma, and gender dysphoria is often a product of extreme trauma. and that is usually a red flag for when someone's dysphoria isn't inherent. I think especially Shane. So Shane was the liberal trans guy who was about 6 feet tall, had a beard, had glasses, looked a little bit like that guy from Les Mis who played Javert. Shane's story definitely read as gender non-conforming lesbian, kicked out of the house as a teenager, was homeless for a few years, started transitioning while homeless. Shane never mentioned being a lesbian at all, but he did mention that he had a wife and that he was often bullied for looking masculine or for being larger than the average woman.
Overseas, yeah, you don't necessarily have access to refrigerators for your testosterone or any of that other stuff. So if you're taking injections, it's a lot different.
I'm supposed to refrigerate it?
I don't know. I don't take.
I loved Andrew, by the way. Andrew was literally me.
Andrew mentioned something about having drug-addicted parents.
This is where y'all's privilege come in, because if y'all don't need
My privilege?
services,
My content is a
trans,
resource.
If you do not need
First of all, ma'am, don't come from my
nonprofits
privilege.
that are trans-led,
Because
you have
I was raised by
privilege
drug
and you
addicts.
have
I had
access.
HIV.
Like, all the biological females there clearly had gone through intense trauma, where I'm looking at that and I'm saying, yeah, I'm kind of not surprised they ended up transitioning. I watched the debate, and then I watched Blaire White react to it, and then Sarah Higdon react to it. Both of them claimed that the questions were out of order, and I'm inclined to believe them because I think Jubilee does do that. So the first question in the video was the bathroom debate.
It depends.
So I think that to start it off though too is it's not necessarily.
Okay, I know I said don't be mean and make fun of appearances, but Andrew, I love you, but that outfit is giving Arthur. Not every single question asked each one was obviously divisive and obviously either a right-wing talking point or a left-wing talking point. You could predict which 4 were going to sit down first. All 4 conservative trans people sat down. I couldn't help but feel that the 3 trans women were hypocrites. Because aside from Blaire, Sarah and Jessica don't really pass. Sarah might pass from far away because she's small, but I'm not gonna lie, as soon as she opens her mouth, you can tell it's not a woman. Why was Sarah Higdon even on the conservative side? She isn't a conservative. She's libertarian, as she's stated many times on our channel. Her values were often not aligning with the other conservative trans people on the panel.
I actually don't really care too much about, you know, if you are an adult and you walk into a doctor's office and want estrogen and you walk out, I don't think that's an issue.
Sarah Higdon and Blaire White are both trans women on YouTube. And honestly, I appreciate Sarah Higdon as a content creator more because she has way more nuanced takes than Blaire and doesn't just rip into a person's appearance. I find Sarah to be a much more palatable, informative YouTuber. Sarah doesn't try to put on a feminine voice, but I actually appreciate that because I find it incredibly obnoxious when trans women feminize their voices because 99% of the time they just sound like
Men impersonating little girls.
They have this vocal fry that's really painful to listen to, and Sarah doesn't have that. So I will say, despite Sarah not sounding like a woman, I actually do enjoy listening to her voice more than Blaire White. You just know behind the scenes, all 3 of them were using the women's restroom, and only one of them was really passing. The other 2 were making the women uncomfortable. Then Jessica mentions that she doesn't use the women's restroom.
I've transitioned almost 8 years ago, but 6 years ago, it was never an issue for me to use the women's room. Girls would literally drag me in there with them and say, girl, you need to be in our bathroom. And I was like, I felt uncomfortable back then. I don't pass. I know I don't pass. Women have spoke out. They've come out and said, we're not comfortable. There's too many self-ID'd people out there just taking advantage. And I choose to use the men's room.
That was super respectful of her to admit and to actually do, because I can't imagine how scary it would be walking into the men's room being extremely gender non-conforming or being uncomfortable even being a man and you're going into the men's room. It was extremely refreshing to hear that self-awareness. My only issue with something that Jessica said was that she felt like it was quote-unquote something she needed to work on. The goal of alleviating your gender dysphoria is to alleviate your gender dysphoria, not look exactly like a woman, because she's tall and she's built very masculine. There's nothing she can do to change that, and I don't think that she should be going to such extreme lengths of breaking her shins or shoulders to make her smaller or something. I don't think she should be going through that effort just to mold her body into being what it's never going to become. That's all. Honestly, I think Jessica, Andrew, and Sarah were my favorite people there. As far as how Blaire White was represented, the only thing I noticed was that it was clear she wasn't getting enough time to speak, or her voice wasn't being heard, especially towards the end. And she was often being cut off. I noticed that. But I don't think she looked any worse than she normally does, because her behavior and her snarky comments and remarks, this is exactly how she acts on her podcast. So it is clear that Jubilee manipulated the video so that she didn't talk as much, and that you didn't see all the attacks she was getting from everybody else. But she normally acts very catty, and while that is entertaining to watch, I don't really like it. Some other thoughts I had. Blossom and Alexander were completely groomed. I want to look up Alexander's pronouns, so I'm now misgendering Alexander.
One eternity later.
So Alexander just uses all pronouns, so I can call him he if I want to. Okay. Blossom and Alexander, the two biological males on the left-leaning side, they were both very obviously groomed by the L+ community. I have no idea how long Blossom has experienced gender dysphoria. I don't know if she figured out she was trans on her own or from other people, but she's been on Ellen, she's been to the White House, she was funded her way through college by Caitlyn Jenner.
I want you to take that talk that she had.
Yeah.
I want you to edit it together.
Okay.
Okay, and I want you to give it to me.
You got it.
Okay. We're going to get her on the... We're going to get her on the Ellen DeGeneres show. I'm going to call Ellen.
Yeah.
And she's going to go to nursing school, and we're going to pay for it.
She has had everything handed to her, and it was 100% because not only is she a trans woman, but she's a black trans woman. A lot of people were annoyed by Blossom bringing race into her argument, being the only black person there, because she was the only one making a big deal about race. But I don't think it was just her. I do think that she was handed a lot of attention and a lot of wealth throughout her 20s.
Not exactly sure how old she is.
Based on her identity. So now she thinks that being a black trans woman is the most important thing about her. You know, Blossom was just a clear example of being groomed by the entire community to speak for them and not really having her own voice other than to repeat what everyone else is saying. Alexander, he mentioned that he grew up extremely conservative, very similar to Blaire White. I think, honestly, the way they grew up was very similar. Blaire and Alexander grew up in very conservative households. Both of them struggled with body image issues. Both of them had mental health issues. Both of them are very feminine.
I actually talked so much about pronouns. Like they, them, all this. I was like, what is this trash? Because I got to spend time around other people who were non-binary, who were non-conforming, and I got to speak with them and I got to experience their life and their experiences. And then I realized myself, this is what I've been experiencing my whole life, only because I was exposed to it. If I would have never been exposed to it, I would have never known that this could have been my experience.
Alexander is a clear example of, I found out I was non-binary because I was hanging out around a bunch of other non-binary people. You can watch my video, How to Know You're Non-Binary, to get a clear example of what this looks like.
That's really cool. You shouldn't have to conform to society's expectation of what it means to be non-binary. Wow, I'm really glad I met you, Vince. Thanks for introducing me to your friend, Cassidy. You know, I've kind of always really liked the name Jay. Are you non-binary? Yeah, listening to both of you, it's like you're both reading my mind. I'm definitely non-binary.
Your friends all identify as non-binary, you relate on a bunch of different things, and suddenly you're all non-binary. Something that Alexander said that troubled me was when he brought up that he wants to get facial feminization surgery, and he did mention he had body image issues. He was questioned about his gender dysphoria, and like he was making a mockery of gender dysphoria. He compared gender dysphoria to women with body dysmorphia who want to get breast implants. He insisted that gender dysphoria did have something to do with dressing masculine versus dressing feminine. That is incredibly offensive to people who struggled with the intense sex-focused body dysmorphia of gender dysphoria. I do think gender dysphoria is a type of body dysmorphia. It was clear that Alexander didn't have that or didn't understand it. So, of course, he does the thing that every insecure, non-binary person does when people say,
they're not null and trans people.
He insisted he was going to get surgery. This bothers me, and I don't really know if there's a solution, because ultimately it is a product of insecurity and wanting to fit in. A lot of non-binary people will get certain gender-affirming surgeries so that they can insist non-binary is real, we transition just like you guys.
That means more so just that this body feels right to me. Almost in the same way that someone would feel like they look how they should look with dyed hair or tattoos or something.
I think that is a product of trans people insisting
you're not part of the club because you don't transition.
But at the end of the day, no one can force these non-binary people to make these body modifications. It is all them. Toward the end of the video, Alexander and Blaire bicker about whether non-binary is trans or not. Alexander is very personally offended. A lot of non-binary people get personally offended when you say they're not really trans. Literally, why is it offensive for people to say you're not trans? That shows that it's cool.
And I think you're trans and you're a part of my community.
Thank you.
Yep.
I really appreciate it.
Again, that just adds to the assumption that being trans makes you part of
the cool kids club.
Oh, there was a pretty interesting conversation about trans men and binder. This was the question of should minors be allowed to transition? Of course, all four liberals sat down. Both trans guys on the liberal side talked about how they had really bad back issues and spinal issues because they had binded with a chest binder for so many years, and they wished they had had top surgery when they were in their teens so that they didn't have all the problems they did now. And then Andrew, he's the conservative, he says he's against surgeries in general. He was right when he said he was against bottom surgery because you do need what you have. Trying to get the opposite is going to be non-functional. It is going to be purely aesthetic, and you do kind of need what you have down there. Well, I don't, but you do. But what I didn't actually agree with Andrew on was that top surgery was as harmful as bottom surgery, because while I don't think people should be getting cosmetic surgery, top surgery is something that patients with breast cancer get. The surgery has been done so many times that it can be done in a safe and easy way. The only reason we get huge complications with top surgery is because there's such a huge demand for top surgery now, and a bunch of surgeons are trying to meet that demand even though they're not super qualified and they'll do a poor, quick job. But I do think top surgery can be done in a safer way, and I don't think it's as devastating as, say, bottom surgery is.
I swear for 3 days straight.
I know, me too. And that's what's you're not.
Especially during 2022, I was wearing a binder for all waking hours of the day on a daily basis, and even I couldn't do 3 days in a row because if I tried to sleep in a binder, I would wake up feeling nauseous. Now, in a different video, Sarah called out these trans guys and said, well, of course you have back issues. You were not wearing a binder safely. And then a couple of lesbian YouTubers responding to this video said, if you don't understand how to wear a binder properly, how can you be responsible enough to choose to get top surgery? I think that even wearing a binder for 6 to 8 hours a day, every single day, for years, is still going to ruin your back. Maybe just not as quickly as wearing a binder all day, every day, for multiple days at a time would. I think ultimately the solution is for trans men to just not wear a binder. I don't think they should be getting surgery, but binding is also not good, and they should just not wear a binder at all and learn to live with their chest and learn to live with being women. But life sucks, and it's often not that easy. I know for myself, no matter how many people told me not to wear a binder, I would still wear a binder. I understand the anxiety in not being able to wear your binder when you want to, because you can't just turn your dysphoria off in between those 6 to 8 hours of binding your chest.
But as I've aged in my transition, because I've been trans for damn near almost 20 years now, I've discovered my own fluidity in that area because I actually enjoy my female side too.
Shane said something very interesting. So Shane is the trans guy who was homeless and started transitioning while homeless. And he said that because he was responsible for himself at 16, he believes that some trans guys can be responsible enough at 16, 17 to make decisions to transition. But then even he admits that he is no longer on testosterone and that he didn't realize until later that he wants to keep his female organs so that he could maybe get pregnant one day.
Are you telling me that he thought this at 16, at 21, at 25?
Yeah, I don't think so.
I think he was fully intent on getting a hysterectomy or something, but, you know, over time changed his mind as he learned to explore himself. And if he still isn't fully understanding of himself in his 20s and 30s, how can a 16-year-old possibly understand himself? Finally, the last thing that Sarah really covered more on her YouTube channel. So when Alexander was talking about recognizing that he was non-binary and admitting he had had body image issues, which, like, literally everybody has had body image issues, dude, that's not the definition of gender dysphoria. Sarah asked him about his gender dysphoria, and then later on her channel talked about how she knew she was a girl as young as 4 years old.
Transsexuals, as Blaire said, have a medical condition that we have known about since we basically became self-aware. For me, it was around, 4 years old. What almost every trans person that I know that's happy in their transition has known since they were about 4 years old. This is not just something that appears later in life unless you experience some sort of trauma.
If you knew you were a girl since you were 4, why did you wait until your late 20s to transition? Most people have wanted to be the opposite sex at some point or another. For some people, it was longer than others. You all, all these conservative trans people claim that they just knew they were trans without being told by the internet or anything. Like, that's a lie. You all heard about transgender issues years before you knew you were trans. Sure, maybe you always felt like a girl, maybe you always felt like a boy, but you didn't know what being trans was until you found out what it was. So I find it rather hypocritical of you to criticize trans teens and people like Alexander for finding out what transgenderism was from their friends or from the internet, because you all did too. I also wonder, would Sarah have a problem with conservative trans people who didn't realize they were trans until after a traumatic experience or until they were in their mid-20s? What about Jessica? She looked like she was in her 40s. I'm sorry if you're in your 30s. Jessica was bomb. Like, I wish she had gotten to talk more. Did Jessica know she was trans since she was 4 years old? Why did she wait until her 30s to transition? Like, you could argue, oh, I was in a conservative household, I was in a denial for several years. Imagine how many trans people in the conservative community didn't realize they were trans until later ages. All these things that you're questioning other people, you have to look at yourself and say, well, why am I not putting in as much effort to pass? Why did I wait until after serving in the military to transition? I just see a lot more hypocrisy with conservative trans people than people are willing to admit. And then I just wanted to sympathize with the trans guys because they weren't making good decisions, but I also know how hard it is to make good decisions when your brain is literally attacking you 24/7. I love this outfit. Like, I think this is turning me into an autoandrophile.